Um, I guess first of all, why did you choose to study theology?
Yeah, I chose to study theology after, as I say it, the church I was working at made the mistake of letting me teach. And
Hmm.
so between high school and college, I ended up working full time at a church. It wasn't my initial plan. I had plans to go away and actually study medicine, but I had been interning at the church. They offered me a full time job. And after some deliberation, I ended up taking it. It's kind of a gap year, but really enjoyed it. Anyway, during that time, they allowed me to do some teaching in the high school ministry, and I absolutely fell in love with it. But I also realized how much I didn't know, which was kind of exciting, but also kind of terrifying. And so, having been someone that was always kind of academically minded, I began looking for programs, and theology just really appealed to me, both in the sense that it would allow me to kind of get some of those answers, fill in some of those gaps to all the things I realized I didn't know, or at least some of them. But it was also just this amazing puzzle, right, of getting to wrestle with these questions that people have been wrestling with for so long. So that's kind of what drew me to theology.
Did you study philosophy at all before that?
I did not. And that's kind of an interesting, I think, difference between just the way theology is approached between Catholics and Protestants is that philosophy plays a much smaller, at least explicit role in Protestant theological training. There's not philosophy first, then theology, and it's not even, again, explicitly that big of a part of the theology curriculum.
Okay. So why did you decide to start Gospel Simplicity?
Yeah, so it was actually at that same time when I first got kind of the teaching bug in me that I really started loving that. But I was looking for opportunities to speak more and to get better at it. And I was talking with a mentor of mine who was a pastor at another church that I really respected. And I asked him, kind of, what advice do you have? How can I get better at this? And he said, just keep fighting for at bats, see how many opportunities you can get to speak and do it as often as you can. And I kind of took that and I was thinking about it. And I had already been involved in video. That's what I was doing at the church for my main role. And I realized, I've got a camera and I've got some microphones. I could sit down and just start talking to the camera to get better at public speaking and, video editing and all that. And so at first, it just kind of became an outlet to get better at communicating these ideas I had in my head. And it morphed and changed a lot along the way, but that's how it started.
What has it been like so far having a Christian podcast?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it probably depends on the day you ask me that question, the kind of answer you'll get, or how many comments I've been reading lately. But on the whole, I really enjoy it. At its best, I describe it as I get to sit down and have conversations with people I would have dreamed of having conversations with, people whose content I consume just for personal pleasure. And not only do I get to have those conversations, not only do I get to make relationships with those people, but I get to share them with people, and it became part of my job. And so at that level, it's an absolute blessing. Like anything, there's when it becomes your job and it has its highs and lows with it. The comment section of YouTube has this funny way of not bringing out the best in people at all times. And so it can be a unique challenge, especially given the channel that I have of trying to bring people together. In so doing, there's also a lot of bickering and arguing. And so when you have an audience as diverse as mine, they tend to like to argue, which can be draining at times. But on the whole, getting to do the interviews, getting to meet people, getting to research for them, I mean, that is all such a great joy. And I really enjoy all of that part.
What are your hopes for the channel in the future?
Yeah, I have a few of them. So I think the biggest thing is that gospel simplicity would be a place where people from across the Christian tradition of various viewpoints, of various backgrounds, could come together to try to deepen their faith, to learn from one another, and to seek to build bridges as we together try to pursue truth, right? Because if we see God as the way, the truth, and the life, that he is truth itself, that ultimately, if we're all looking honestly, if we're all trying to search together, we should be brought together. At the very least, we should be able to understand one another better. So that's kind of the big picture goal for gospel simplicity. But along the way, I'd love to allow people to find more meaningful ways to connect, which is some things I've got some projects I've been working on, such as a book group that's coming together for my patrons, where we'll be going through a classic Christian text. And my patrons come from Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant backgrounds, and we'll be able to actually go through a little more slowly and read together and talk. So really facilitate those relationships. And I also hope to be able to take the gift that it is to have a theological education and to have access to people at the top of the field and continue to provide avenues for people that, whether because of time or money, don't have the time to get a theological education, can get really great insight and knowledge from gospel simplicity for free.
Just to backtrack a bit, when you were teaching, kind of, you call it like a gap year, like what kind of things were you teaching about?
Yeah, well, the series that also kind of had its biggest impact on gospel simplicity was actually a series on different faiths and different areas of the Christian tradition. And so I was teaching on various things. I was teaching in a high school ministry. And so whatever kind of the series they were teaching in, I would kind of teach a week or so. But at one point over that summer, they asked me to teach a series on different religions. And like I said, different kind of denominations within the Christian church or different branches of the Christian tree, however you want to kind of look at that. And I was very hesitant. I've always loved talking with people who I disagree with. I find it really interesting. I find it the best way to learn. But I was really scared to misrepresent people. And so I told them that I would do it on the condition that I could go and take time to sit down with all of the people that they'd have me represent before I did that. And so I went and had tea at a mosque. I went and sat down with a rabbi. I went to an Orthodox church, actually way back before any of this gospel simplicity stuff started. And the series eventually changed into a series that I called Love Across the Lines, which has become one of the mottos of gospel simplicity. And the whole point in it was learning to talk with people whom we disagree. Or I think the subtitle was actually Loving Those with Whom You Disagree, because we draw these lines in the sand between us and them, and often we kind of caricature other people, or we think of them as, ideas are dangerous and we don't want to interact with those. And I was trying to kind of erase those lines in the sand, not in the sense that we skim over all the differences, because I do think those differences exist and I think they're meaningful, but to approach it in such a way that says, what if I came to this with an attitude of, I can learn something here, because if I'm being honest, I don't know that much about a lot of these things. And so that was what I tried to bring to the students there. And that's still kind of the ethos that I bring to my work with gospel simplicity.
Can you talk a bit about how you see Christianity among your own generation?
Yeah, in terms of like how it's being taken up, how people look at Christianity, or is there a specific kind of angle on that?
However you want to answer it, like both of those would be good.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, right? And I'm going to have to speak in broad generalities here, right? Because we're talking about a whole generation. Of course, you could lead with kind of the statistics of increasingly people of my generation are walking out of churches or just never walking in the first place. I grew up in kind of the DC region, where in high school, most of my friends didn't go to church. And it wasn't like maybe the generation before where they had gone to church and they walked away and they just had a bad taste in their mouth. A lot of them like just had no opinion, really. It just was a non-issue for them. And so I think we're seeing lots of that, but I think that creates an interesting opportunity for those who do consider themselves followers of Christ and for the church, because no longer is it this sense of, hey, I was a Christian and now I'm not, and I don't like it for X, Y, or Z reason. Of course that exists and it's going to vary place to place and person to person. But I think increasingly we're having the opportunity to not just present the gospel in a fresh way or given a new perspective, but just for the first time, and to really present it as good news. And so while there are great challenges in terms of church attendance and decline of Christianity among young people, I think it creates this opportunity for a new evangelism, to use a Catholic term there. I believe that was JP2, Pope John Paul II. I should probably not just refer to him offhand as JP2 there. But I think it does create this opportunity to bridge these gaps and to introduce people to Jesus in a way that they're going to find compelling and interesting, because it is new for them. And so I'm excited for that. And I think anytime that the church wanes, or anytime that we see people walking away, those who are committed are there not just culturally, but they're there because they care about it. And so I think for the young people in my generation who are Christians, I think we're seeing a lot of passion out of them and a lot of desire to find innovative ways to reach their peers, to connect with one another, and to just try to deepen their own faith. So I think there's the reality of a lot of people walking away, but I also do have, maybe I'll call it cautious optimism about the future and the opportunities that the present challenges present.
What are you doing for work currently?
Yeah. So as of 1 week ago today, I started working in public relations. And so I got to that fun point in college where you sit down and you go, what can I actually do and who can I convince to pay me for it? So I found myself there not too long ago, but I've always had a passion for writing, for communicating, and that's what, part of what I do in Gospel Simplicity is a lot of marketing, which is kind of odd, but, it's part of YouTube. And so certainly with a theology degree, we do hardly anything but read and write. So I began looking for jobs that could leverage that. And I found a job in public relations. And so now I'm an account coordinator at a public relations agency that works with high-tech clients and like business to business spaces, from like manufacturing, logistics, solar, all that kind of stuff.
I worked in public relations for a while myself.
Oh, nice.
I studied philosophy and had that same moment of,
yep.
Now what?
Yeah.
What are your personal plans for the future?
Yeah, well, so a whole lot has just changed in my life. I have, in the last month, graduated college, gotten married, moved, and started a new job.
Wow.
So it's been this time of like, wow, everything is so different. This is really exciting. And now it's kind of reorient to all of this. So plans for the future, I am a person that loves to plan, and I love to plan to like the nth degree. And I've found myself enough times realizing that no matter how much I plan, it ends up changing, that I'm starting to slowly learn to hold these plans a little more loosely. But some of my goals for the future, I'll start with having just gotten married. One of my biggest goals is to be a good husband and hopefully a good father at some point, who can just kind of shepherd my family and love them well. Because I think all of the rest of this, if I'm not loving God and loving my family well, it just feels really empty. But on maybe the more career side of that, the things that I would love to do is continue to grow Gospel Simplicity, and not just for the sake of like the vanity metrics, but so that it can actually make some real world impact. I would love to be able to continue what I see as the most fun videos I do, which are the in-person videos where I do church tours or stay at monasteries. And I would love to expand that out. I would love to get to Italy and Greece and be able to bring really unique content to people that's really meaningful. And I also, since I was young enough to read, have had the desire to write books. And so if, Lord willing, one day the audience that has grown from Gospel Simplicity makes possible the idea of writing books, that would be just a dream come true. So there's a lot there. We'll see. But I think if I can start with those first few things and get those right, anything else would just be icing on the cake.
Could you talk, you kind of talked about this already, but do you have anything more to say about new forms of media and kind of reaching like evangelic? I've only read this word a million times, never say it. You know what I'm getting at. Like reaching out to new people to teach them about Christianity, basically.
Yeah, I think we live in such a unique time that presents a lot of opportunities, and that I can, from my dorm room, and if people could see my setup in my dorm room when I was there, they would laugh at these videos that I'm making where I'm like pushing my book slightly out of frame, and my dorm room's a mess, and I'm like crowded into this narrow area between my desk and my bunk. That videos made there could reach, I think the channel's reached something like 3 million views at this point, which boggles my mind. It is an insane opportunity. And I'm still wrapping my head around that. The fact that what I'm doing could reach that many people. And so there's the excitement around that. And I think new media does have this amazing opportunity to reach masses. But I also think that we've at times been a bit overzealous in what it can do. what it's great at doing is introducing people. What it's great at doing is entertaining people and bringing niches together. Now you can find not only other Catholics or Protestants in your area, you can find ones that like the same type of music and use the same hymnal, or are, Latin mass loving Catholics who have also read the same devotional as you. Like, you can get really niched down. But I think at times we can be maybe over optimistic about kind of the deep change that results from the internet. And maybe in so doing, because the internet's easy, it's like fast food. You can do it at scale, you can get it cheaply, and it tastes good. It's fun for a time. But I'm skeptical that at times we think that this can somehow replace the deep work of sitting down with people and discipling them, or sitting down with people and going through life with them and journeying together. So I think it's great to cast a really wide net and to reach more people and introduce them. It's a great front door, or it's a great kind of window display for a business, if you will. But I think we have to also recognize, okay, if it can get people maybe to the church or interested in church, but can we remember that the core of what we do, I don't think should ever be, increasing the downloads of our podcast or reaching 1 million people on YouTube. I think Jesus was much more effective with leaning into 12 guys than I'll ever be in reaching 3 million views on YouTube.
What would you say to young people who might kind of, see the window dressing and be interested, but that's kind of where they're at?
Yeah, I would say give it a try. I like, if you're out there and you're looking at the church and you're saying, this is somewhat interesting to me. Maybe I listened to Gospel Simplicity or some far better YouTube channel or something, more interesting is probably what got them in, right? But, and they're saying, this whole Jesus thing, it's intriguing to me. My biggest thing would be like, just keep taking that next step. But because the window dressing's great, and the icing of the cake, or whatever metaphor we want to use here, is great, but really the best is when you walk through that door. Sometimes I think of it also like a house. Like, you can have this beautiful foyer, but the memories aren't usually made by your front door. The memories are made in the living room, around the kitchen table, where you sit down and you spend that quality time. And so if you're looking at the church and you're saying, this looks pretty, but maybe I'm not feeling that transformation, or maybe I'm interested, but I'm not sure what to do next, just keep taking those next steps, and recognize that it's going to be messy, that we can make beautiful YouTube videos and no one has to get to know you. You don't have to be vulnerable, and you don't have to actually change, and it can feel really great. But if you really want to experience the heart of Christianity, just keep taking those steps in and deeper. Have grace for the church. Like, hopefully it will have grace for you. But give it a try and keep going. And I hope that it impacts your life the way that has mine.
I should ask you, where did you study theology?
Yeah, I studied it at the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago.
Okay. Where are you living now?
I live in Williamsport, Maryland, which is a little town on the C&O Canal in kind of like central Western Maryland, maybe an hour and a half from DC or so.
Okay. And there's not many Protestants in Canada. So I should ask, it's like, I'm sure you've heard of Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of French Catholics.
Okay.
So like it's not really like the States where like there's a lot of Protestants. But I should ask you, is there a denomination that you belong to that I should know about?
Great question. No, not really. So I grew up in a non-denominational church, which in the US, I feel like is really just a fancy way of saying like they're Baptists that never got around to actually being called Baptists. That might be slightly a bit of an exaggeration, but I mean, they were Credo Baptists and their baptismal theology, and they're Congregationalists in how they kind of arrange their church governance. And so they're pretty much Baptist in everything but name, but choose, I think, for reasons of branding makes it sound so bad. But essentially this opportunity to say, hey, we're not affiliated with maybe these groups that you've had a bad experience with. We're a church that's just trying to seek Christ and follow scripture. So that's what I grew up in. And over the past, it's only been like a year and a half that I've been really investigating Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and the history of the church in terms of where it should be now. Of course, there were my classes and everything like that. But in that time, I haven't necessarily settled into any other tradition. So I think the most accurate answer to that would just still be non-denominational, even though I can make, or you know, I could probably agree with some people on from various perspectives on the maybe downsides of non-denominational. That's kind of still where I'm at.
This is probably like an hour-long answer, so you don't have to give an hour-long answer, but why do you think that's the case?
Why do I think what's the case?
Why do you consider yourself a non-denominational Protestant as opposed to something else?
Yeah, well, I think I can probably give a lot shorter than an hour-long answer on that. And it might be an answer that isn't that exciting. But I think it's essentially, that's where I grew up. That's what feels like home. That's where I, you know, came to faith. That's where I came to love not only theology, but the church, and had just the joy of embarking on this journey of following Jesus. And in my time of looking across denominations, I've found lots to love. But as of yet, I just haven't settled anywhere else. So it's kind of like I just haven't left home in a way. So yeah, as much as I would love to say that it's because I've surveyed everything in a year and a half, which, come on, there's a lot to survey there. But as much as I'd love to say, yes, I've looked everywhere and I've determined that this is the God-ordained way for doing church, I don't have that level of confidence in that. It's more of, I still have a lot of questions, but I've found that it doesn't do me well to just church hop every week. But it's better to have a sense of rootedness and look out and do the best that I can to make sense of the church. But I guess until I'm convinced of something else, or at least shown that, hey, you know, maybe this isn't 100% that X, Y, or Z is the true church, or the best way, or the God-ordained way of doing church, at least that it's, you know, the most probable way of doing that. And until I have that, it's kind of like, well, this is what's currently feeding my soul. This is what I know. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Dan.
I appreciate it.
It is Dan, right? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mess that up. No, you're good.
And the only other thing I'd say is with the book writing, like, you're extremely articulate, and like, you have an audience. Like, even if you were to sit down and self-publish something, it's like, you're probably going to sell more books than a lot of people that go with traditional publishers. Just something to think about.
I appreciate that. Well, I'd say on the down low, but it really doesn't have to be. For the past, oh my goodness, like 8 months, I submitted, well, actually a acquisitions editor from a Catholic publisher came to me about writing a book, and it just stalled with their editorial team for like 8 months. They're in the process of getting bought and all of that. So I just found out that that's not going through there, but it has kind of opened my thoughts to the fact that, well, one, people seem to be interested in this, and as the audience does continue to grow, it is a possibility to just sit down and write it. But so yeah, I do appreciate that advice.